Over the past 12 months, we've created over 2,000 pieces of content to help multiple Shopify brands scale to over 8 figures in their ad spend. In this video, I'm going to show you step by step our exact process for how you too can start making over 40 pieces of unique creative content that convert each week, and you can steal our process, our exact framework, and start implementing these strategies today and grow your own Shopify brand to 8 figures plus. Okay, let's go ahead and jump right in and look at some examples of what's working today. We've amassed folders of literally thousands of pieces of content that we like to utilize and go through whenever we're bringing on a new ad account. And so if you need help with your creative direction, just reach out. I'd be happy to give you some of these resources. And there's just a couple categories that I want to emphasize on first of all. The first one I want to go over is UGC.
Okay, so I'm a pretty active person and I'm always on the go, and I need a bag that complements.
So the main thing that you'll notice with the UGC is it's very human to human level. You have someone talking directly to you, directly at the camera, and talking about the product. What are some of the benefits that they've seen from it? How are they able to resolve some of their problems that they were experiencing? In this example, you have it positing from a question, what was your favorite gym bag? And notice how you're going right into the action. You're in an environment to show a gym-esque or a workout and type of environment to have your gym bag with you. And so these type of UGC contents are really great because it's just authentic. You have someone talking directly to you and just going through some of the pain points that we're able to resolve or some of the product features. So I would always start those specifically for top of funnel. And there's some really great examples. I won't play all the videos now, but just talking about a very human to human level, being relatable, talking directly to camera. The other thing that's really good for images is us versus them. This is really good and useful for positioning. And so this can talk about old features or your unique selling points. It can be on the nutritional benefit side, on the calorie level. It's a really great way to find existing legacy products and comparing why your product is different. Another really useful framework, problem, agitate, and solve. Here's a really great example of that I'd like to show you.
Impulsive, moody, easily distracted. We've come to accept that this is normal, but that's because no one taught us that bad behavior is often linked to bad nutrition. This should not be normal. Parents, let's do something about it.
So notice how you start off with the problem first. And as I'm sure every parent can tell you, of a parent of a young child, is that they get moody, they get very difficult to deal with. You have tantrums that you have to deal with. And so they start off with a very relatable problem of a moody child, and then repositioning as a solution, hey, diet is really important. The nutrition and the food that you give to your child is gonna have a direct impact on things of those problems that you're experiencing. And so this is a really great example of starting off with the problem, figuring out the agitation, and then coming in and positioning your product as a solution for that. So those are really great ways to talk about what ultimately is the solution that you're providing, focusing on that problem that's being experienced, and then coming up and talking about how you can provide a solution. So there's some other really great examples of going through that. These images also do really well. I would put these in the static image part of just social proof as well. So pulling out a review and putting that over the image itself. And the other thing that I've seen some brands do is a little bit more tongue-in-cheek with putting negative reviews. And so you can definitely introduce humor, talking about this is the worst product I've ever seen, some random guy on the internet, and utilize that as well. I would experiment with both ultimately, but these static images with reviews are a very great example as well. Founder stories are also a really great way to talk about your product, specifically for brands that don't have brand recognition, which is frankly probably most brands out there who are still developing their name. Founder story is a really great way to be more personable, have that human to human authentic layer involved in your product as well. So I would definitely test these, especially if you have a unique product, to talk about the story of how you created it. These typically do very well as well. Press shots, these are great examples, very similar to social proof. If you have featured media or reviews, I would put these in the same category for having those specific social proof callouts as great examples. And then looking at a couple other examples, this is one I really wanted to highlight, is going through the framework from the beginning. So notice how they start off with, we're not cheap. So instantly in your mind, they're disqualifying the type of customer that was, I just want the cheapest product. I'm a really big fan of this type of content, focusing on the product, focusing on the all natural ingredients, what I would call the USPs, 20 grams of protein, grass-fed bar, but going in specifically for in the framework as, hey, we're not the cheapest option, but it's because we have the best quality ingredients. So these type of static images do really well as well. We've talked about founder stories. We've talked about UGC. Video in general doesn't always have to be UGC. So you can introduce humor or different other forms as well that I often see really work well, or just product features. But in general, what I would focus on first is getting the UGC, getting some of those static images, getting a comparison point, get a founder story, and the project agitation framework. If you can start off with those examples, it's going to give you a really great framework to build off of. And I'll show you how we go through, analyze your creative to figure out what is actually converting. And so you can later iterate off of that, take your winners, develop them further, and cut your losers. All right, next, what I want to talk about is the production system. So what I often see brand founders do is not have a very clear and methodological process for how they are reviewing content, labeling them, and really building out their overall strategy. So the first thing that I would focus on is your naming convention. For your ads, for your campaigns, you need to do this in a very scalable manner so that as you get incremental knowledge and experience in running these tests, that you have previous data to go back to, and it doesn't just become this huge giant cluster mess of what was this creative that we previously ran, or how do I think about this? So what I would recommend is doing something very similar to this for your naming convention. Talk about the specific test name that you're performing, the type of content that it is, and most importantly, the angle. How are you going about presenting this? And so what this could look like as you put the names on your ads is ultimately something like this, and with these informations filled in. And so it might be hook test, video, and the angle is problem agitation solution. Really make sure that you're using consistent terminology throughout it, end to end, because if you don't do this and have a standard and very clear process, what's going to happen, what I inevitably see, is you'll have 3 months of a specific ad type of content, and then later you might shoot off in a different direction for more UGC focus, and then later come back to more product images. And what happens is you amass all this different content, but you don't have a very clear and consistent framework for how to look at it and how to dissect what were the specific components, whether it be the angle, the type of content, or the specific focal point that really made an impact. So step number one is just make sure you're consistent end to end. And again, what I'd really recommend is talk about the test you're performing, the type of content, and the angle that you're focusing on. And over time, what you'll want to do is get this more filled out as far as the different actual performance and talking about insights and suggestions on the next steps. This is going to be really critical that you do this piece first, making sure this is the same process for how we label content and how we review it. Because again, you're going to want to come back to this information month later and make sure that you can apply the same learning that you had from months ago or even a year ago and compare it to the content that you have generated today. So step one, make sure that you have your creative in the consistent naming convention. What we like to do as far as sending over a new brief is talking about starting with the end goal in mind. What is this outcome that we want to generate? And then working backwards from that. So anytime we're creating a new piece of content, we'll first go over this brief, talk about the KPIs, what is the main goals, what is the main testing point. So we'll send this off to our creative team, have this information filled out, and then go through and come up with, based on this information, what are the creative ideas that we want to implement. And so once we get this information, it's a lot easier for us to generate an exact shot list. This will be the same information that we later take to our production team to plan out the shot list. And so this is with videos, for images. Make sure you go through that brief first. Because if you've worked with content teams before, you know how expensive that can get. And so it's really critical that you have a very detailed shot list coming in, fleshed out with examples, fleshed out with very clear goals of what's intended to be achieved, so you can minimize some of that cost in production. Because that's generally where I see brands having issues, is they need to have much more higher creative velocity, but it becomes a huge cost burden for them to be able to do this efficiently. So I would really highly recommend going through creative briefs, being very strategic in the content shoot, and having very clear and specific shot lists that you have planned. And so that way you can be as most efficient as possible with your content team. As far as product that you need, honestly, you can do this very low budget as well. I would recommend having a stabilizer or a gimbal for your video, but you can do all of this quite literally with an iPhone, like what I'm shooting this video right now. So I would recommend you don't need to go overboard with the content. If you're doing product shots or lifestyle, sometimes having a little bit more of that authentic feel can be important. For product shots on your website, I definitely would recommend having just clear, white, transparent, a little bit more of a high-touch product photography. That's going to be important for you to generate as well if you ever have product overlays or other items involved into it. But overall, you'd be surprised with how little you can get by with just simply an iPhone and a stabilizer. Those would be the two pieces of equipment that I would recommend that you include. As far as sourcing talent and actors for these, we've actually found a lot of success with Facebook groups and immediate network. So specifically for brands that are trying to do this on a lower budget, you're going to have a lot more success. You could ultimately go through a contact agency for people who can give you paid placement with actors. But honestly, these get really expensive pretty quickly. And so I would first look up for who are natural UGC influencers that you can engage with and potentially not even be involved in that product shoot, and send them, and they already have the resources equipped to be able to record it. That's frankly probably going to be the more reasonable solution. The other thing that we've done with many brands is do an actual content shoot ourselves. And this is sourcing the actors, getting the personnel, giving them the scripts. There's really no silver bullet for this, but I will say, instead of going through a hiring contact agency for actors, you can get really far with just Facebook groups and offering a paid position, making it very clear about the compensation, the work involved, what's to be expected, any examples, and you can get some really good talent that way. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is how to maximize your content. Because at the end of the day, this isn't cheap. It takes a lot of time and resources and attention and energy to go through these content shoots. So you're shooting yourself in the foot if you're not extrapolating as much value from that as you possibly can. And the way I would think about this is think about what derivatives exist from those pieces of content that you are creating. The prime example of this is going to be coming up with different hooks. So if you have one focal piece of content that has a specific angle that you're going after, I would aim to have at least 3 to 4 different hooks for that same piece of content. Because frankly, this is going to be like the equivalent of an email headline for open rates. The first 3 seconds of your video is going to determine the whole rest of the content. And so you really need to spend a lot of time and attention into testing that and to mapping out the strategy behind that. So again, what does that look like for us? What we'll do is come up with a specific piece of content and look at the data. Are we seeing strong watch through rate or hooks rates? And then what we'll do is come up with different variations of it. And so it can still be the same piece of content, but having different variations thereof. So this being an example, going straight into the workout example, product setup first, or hearing directly from the influencer first. And so all these videos have the same general piece of content and the angle, but notice how the hook was so completely different between all those. You have one going straight into the action, you have one doing more of the product setup, and then you have one hearing directly from the person themselves. What's really important is to make sure that you're using the naming convention that we discussed. And so what I would do here is first creative test name. So this might be exactly those 3 pieces: product setup, straight into usage, hearing from individual first, content type video, and then angle. And so the angle might be, what is the information or subject matter that they're talking about? Is it the pain point of finding time to go to the gym? Is it more on the benefits of being able to work out? Those are going to be more of the angle. And frankly, what I would have is the same angle for all of these, but on the hook specifically, I'm just testing for one type of variable, being the hook specifically. So make sure you're not testing for multiple variables at the same time. Otherwise, it's going to be very hard to find correlations and indicators of what's ultimately helping. All right, let's talk about the framework for scaling. So let's first start out and define what is the outcome that we're trying to produce. The ideal outcome that we want to do is create an evergreen piece of content that can run consistently and continue to generate sales. Because remember, each data point that the algorithm gets incrementally smarter and better at finding your perfect customer. So the solution that we want to do is have content that can run indefinitely, continue to enhance on the algorithm learning, and get smarter and smarter. And of course, we will still have seasonal stuff that'll come up into different trends. Those are important too. But ultimately, what we want to do is create a revenue machine with consistent, predictable revenue coming in and out. And that's going to come from evergreen content. As far as your targeting and audience goes, we keep this very broad. So remember, there's just 4 pieces to the profitability equation. And the first one of those is your CPMs. So what we've seen consistently from testing this with multiple brands is that anytime you try to get too dialed in with your audience targeting, you end up just increasing your CPMs in the process. And that is such a huge piece of the overall equation for just the amount of impressions and the cost it is for you to drive those impressions. And so my recommendation would just be doing very wide and broad targeting and to eliminate people from the funnel if they're a former customer or former purchase, depending on where you're engaging them. The way we think about this for testing is we want to have our evergreen folder that I talked about. That is where items have been tested and validated go into this evergreen continuous folder. And this is going to be a majority of our budget. Think anywhere from 50, 60, up to 70%. Outside of that, we're going to have our testing campaign where we're going to be introducing the new pieces of content that we're generating and coming up with our different hypotheses for scaling campaigns. We're going to put that into the new campaign structure so we can validate, is this working or not? Are we seeing the performance enough for us to move this over to a larger campaign? The way we think about cost structure on this is figure out whatever your CPA is And a good rule of thumb is multiply that by 3x, maybe even to 4x, depending on your price point. That would be the max amount of ad spend I would put on a campaign and seeing no conversions before I would determine to cut it. So if your max CPA that you want to establish is $200, I would maybe spend around $600 for that piece of creative and making sure, is this a winner or not? The thing that you also might need to do is separate them out and to make sure you're getting that type of spending in there. So we generally try to put no more than 2 or 3 different types of videos into a specific ad set. I would recommend doing no more than that just to make sure that items are getting performance. And then as you're seeing performers and winners based on that 3x of the CPA's performance, then you can cut and remove and then also ship them into more of that campaign structure that's for scaling versus testing. As far as metrics that I'm looking at, obviously ROAS is going to be one of the most important, but that's really a result after the fact. So the sub KPIs I would be looking at to help indicate overall ROAS is the CPMs, what is the overall cost of advertising. The click-through rate, is the content engaging? And if it's a video, how's my 3-second hook rate? How's my hold rate? The overall video watch-through rate? The add to cart rate? These are all going to be really helpful metrics to assess, is it the video itself? Is it the hook? Is there other pieces of content that I need to improve off of this? That's how I would look at the overall testing framework. As far as scaling the content goes, again, I would frame it in position of the CPA. So we talked about having that 3 to 4x in terms of overall spend against your CPA target, first for evaluating that. Once you've done that, what I would do is look to move into a campaign that's more for scaling. And so what we do is look at the overall ROAS performance and figure out whatever your benchmark is. So in our case, if we have a 3x, what we'll do is we want to make sure that that test has at least, if we have a CPA of $200, that we have at least $600 in ad spend that has been spent on it. And if we're not seeing the overall results that we would like to do, then we cut it. If we are seeing it, then we'll move it and start scaling more ad spend behind it. And we'll look at some of the soft metrics, like I said, click-through rate, CPMs, and overall metrics also to evaluate where specifically in the product is there an issue. And that's where we also would then take that information, go back to our reporting ad planner, and really isolate, is it the angle that is the issue? Do we need to test out different forms of the content for that angle being delivered? Do we need to focus specifically on the hook point? All that information is going to help come back and reinforce your overall conclusion. So what I would do is take that information, amass it into a spreadsheet, make sure you can figure out your actual ROAS in terms of end performance, and then scale up that way. Your ad targeting for scaling your winners is going to be pretty similar to the testing framework as well. Again, what I would emphasize is very broad targeting. Don't try to go and be smarter than the algorithm. You really need to go and lower your CPMs. And so we do very broad and wide targeting. You can definitely exclude past purchases and previous visitors and things like that. But I would really be emphasizing on minimizing your CPMs. $20 is going to be a good benchmark for an established brand. Make sure you're not going above that, because I can promise you if you start trying to go too detailed into the guided audience insights, that you can see your CPM skyrocket. I've seen $100, $200 even. The whole ad model just completely falls apart at that point. Lastly, what I want to talk about is the loop, the iteration framework. Keep in mind that this is a long journey. This is not just one piece of creative that you're creating. You are attempting to create thousands of creative over the next couple of months. And so it's really important that you have this iterative feedback loop to cut down your cycle time. The faster we can go through the loop of having hypothesis, developing the creative, testing it, and then getting that feedback, the better performance and the quicker we can scale the account. Where I see most brands struggle with this is turning something that could be just a couple weeks into multiple months. You need to be producing more creative than you currently are. And you need to be implementing this type of framework so you can measure it and assess it over a long enough time frame what's actually working. Because what I often see happen is brands are doing these type of testing and iteration, but there's no central authority to ultimately bring this data back to and assess on longer time frames how well is this performing. And so it's really critical that you go through the iteration loops, getting very specific on the testing points, the angles, how are you presenting the product, the different types of content, and then ultimately you're feeding into your production machine to get as much value as possible. And so just to recap on some of the key points, make sure you're testing out some of the different types of creative that we've discussed: UGC, static images, us versus them, problem agitation framework, founder stories. Create some of that content. Make sure you iterate on that content by having multiple different hooks and variations of those specific tests. Make sure you have a consistent labeling format for how you are labeling, describing these tests, and that are consistent across the board, so you can look whether 12 months ago or 1 month ago as the same type of labeling convention. How to analyze your winners and performers and when to cut, so looking at 3 to 4x of your CPA's cost, making sure that you're having a testing campaign versus a scaling campaign, and having those segmented out in terms of your overall ad spend. And then lastly, to improve on your overall iteration framework. So I hope you can take these ideas that we've discussed today and apply them to your campaign. You can either take everything I've shared in this video and do it yourself, or you can reach out to me directly and I'd be happy to help.